I chose to take seriously the work of a 17th century scientist who argued that the mythical islands of antiquity belong to ancient Scandinavian geography. I believe that he can help us in piecing together our past. Today, we are setting the record straight on Ogygia. The distance from Ogygia to the mainland is commonly read as 5,000 stadia, which you've probably heard about if you know anything about Ogygia. This is a classic passage from Plutarch's De Fasci. But the interesting thing is that Rudbeck in his work does not read 5,000 at all. He actually reads 600 instead. And this is of course a very different number, a much shorter one. But I actually believe that this one makes much more sense than 5,000 for a very simple reason. And that is because the sea around Ogygia being described is shallow and tidal, difficult to pass by larger vessels, choked with mud, carried down by rivers flowing from the mainland. So mainland mud chokes up this sea. The accumulated sediment raises their bars and shallows, rendering it barely navigable. Is the open ocean barely navigable from mud? Probably not, right? This makes much more sense as an estuary than an open ocean. 5,000 stadia puts it out in the open Atlantic, being 925 kilometers. There is no mud and no continental rivers bringing mud to it. And of course, there's no narrow passage either. This simply has to be 600 stadia. 600 stadia is not just numerically defensible. It is the only reading that actually fits what Plutarch is describing. And 600 and 5,000 is actually the same distance, just in different units. 600 Roman miles is exactly 5,000 stadia if one stadion is 177.5 meters, which is the Delphic stadion. And the Delphic stadion is the most archaeologically attested one that we do have. You can of course use the 185 meter stadion. Then you get about a 4% difference between these. And that is still practically the same over hundreds of kilometers. An ancient historian can still treat this as being the same all the while. So these two are probably the same distance, explaining why precisely these two numbers appear. So what I believe happened is that someone interpreted 600 stadia as 600 Roman miles to put Ogygia far out into the open ocean. Why did they do that? Because they believed that 600 stadia was simply way too short. They believed that this mythical island had to be out in the open Atlantic, just as Atlantis. So they thought 600 stadia was an obvious mistake. For this to be proven without a shadow of a doubt, you of course need proof. And so far, I found this source. 500 stadia in Philemon Holland's Moralia. It says 500 stadia to the mainland instead. And you might come up with the objection that 500 is just 1 0 dropped from 5,000. But the problem with that is that both numbers in the English version as well as in the Greek version are both spelled numbers. None of them are enumerated, and the spelled numbers are of course very different, so that's not how this mix-up could have happened. What I believe instead happened is that this short distance is actually real, and that both 500 and 600 is again the same length, just a different conversion from an angle. I believe that both 500 and 600 is the same angular distance of 1 degree converted in different geodetic systems. I've talked about the geodetic systems in my previous video. The difference between 600 and 5000 is also geodetic in nature. It's 50 sixths. If a whole number is 60 sixths, then 50 sixths is a whole number minus a sixth. Minus a sixth. Difficult to say. But so the main thing here is that in the old system, or Ptolemaic system, 1 degree is 500 stadia, and in our current system, 600 stadia is 1 degree, and therefore then 600 stadia is also expressed as 1 degree. So 500 and 600 could be the same angular distance expressed in different geodetic systems. So they could be from different eras, basically. The 500 on being Ptolemaic, or before it, and 600 being probably afterwards. Though 600 is probably the oldest one still. And whether you put Ogygia out in the open ocean or near the mainland, of course, affects how you treat the westward direction of Ogygia. Is it westward of England, as in modern versions? Or is it 5-day sail from England in the west? Right? That's a stark difference. But linguistically, it is pretty similar. So Rudbeck, he said it in 1673, and Vinci said it in 2005. And I will comment on that source soon. First, I will need to show you why the scribe actually had probably the opinion that this is how the text should be read. Because this semicolon before the direction, here westward and here northwest, as you can see down here, the semicolon is not ancient Greek lexicon. This is probably from the copyist who made it in the 1300s. The readily apparent way you could read it is the first perspective, which is from England westward, and then the islands from Ogygia being northwest from the first perspective. But if we make a notation that there should be a perspective change here, then it becomes from the third perspective, and that is from the world perspective. Then the western direction is not from England specifically, but in a larger perspective, in the west. And the same is then true of this one. This is not northwest of Ogygia, but in the northwest. Felice Vinci, in his The Baltic Origins of Epic Tales, says that Ogygia is situated 5-day sail towards the west. So this is again the same reading. And he actually did not come up with this from Rudbeck, because he never mentions Rudbeck ever in his work. He actually even denounces earlier works as maverick prehistorians. But it is actually kind of positive, because that makes this source independent from Rudbeck, and makes this also a source for this kind of reading. So we now have 3 details. First, that Ogygia is 5 days sail from England in the west, as per the copyist notation. The sea around Ogygia is shallow, tidal, and mud-choked, with mud coming from the mainland, meaning that this has to be quite close to the mainland, meaning that this is an estuary, not an open ocean. And thirdly, Scandinavia was seen as an island in antiquity. The very name Scandinavia means Scadan Island, if you just look up the etymology. And the ancient geographic descriptions of Scandinavia, none of them say that Scandinavia is a peninsula. 100% of them say that this is an island in antiquity. They believed that Scandinavia was an island. And isn't it very interesting that this shift from believing that it is an island to believing that it is a peninsula, this shift can of course explain where the islands went. Not somewhere geographically, in a physical sense, but in our minds. Taken together, Plutarch's description does not merely suggest Scandinavia, it is difficult to make it describe anywhere else. That's it for today, and I will see you soon.